Hello everyone, welcome to today's class. Before we look at what we are going to discuss today, I just want to quickly have a recap of what we treated the last time. In our last class we talked about the properties of water, that is the physical and the chemical properties. And we saw that of course water is odorless, tasteless and so on and so forth. Water has a boiling point of 100 degrees Celsius and the likes of it. Now, under the chemical properties, we saw how water can react with metals in the reactivity series, which is actually divided into three portions. We saw some metals that can react with cold water. Then the other part, they can react with steam. It's only iron that can react with excess steam, but is also among the category of those that can react with steam. And the last batch was they don't have any reaction with water. Now we went ahead to look at the test for water, for which when we saw that a few drops of water was added to white anhydrous copper 2 tetrahydrosulfate 6, it changes blue. That was shown in our last video. And we also saw that the second type of test can also be a change of its color from blue to pink by adding a few drops of water to cobalt 2 chloride. Now in today's class, we want to look at the treatment and supply of natural water to townships. Now the treatment here, of course, you will agree with me that everyone uses water, both domestically and industrially. And so in this case, water has to be supplied for our usage. Now, how do we get this water? Water is actually gotten from the natural sources. Remember, in our first class, I did talk about the sources of water we have, which are both the natural and the treated. So under this topic, where we treat water and also supply municipal water to townships, we want to look at the various stages that are involved in treating this water. Now, before I go ahead, the plant that is employed in the treatment of water is known as the water treatment plant. That's the equipment that is used. Now in this plant it has various stages, and the various stages I am just going to list them out. The first stage is aeration. The second stage is coagulation / flocculation. The third stage is sedimentation. The fourth stage is filtration. And the fifth stage is disinfection. So all of these stages I'm just going to quickly explain what happens. In the aeration stage, is an equipment that employs where water is allowed to let fall in steps. Now, when the water is taken from the natural source via pipes, it is let into this compartment where aeration takes place. And the water is allowed to, the compartment has different steps. So the water falls through the different steps. What is the essence of this? Is to allow the mixture of air. So when air mixes with the water, now the mixture results to the removal of iron 3 ions. Then we have volatile chemicals such as hydrogen sulfide is also removed. CO2 is also removed, which is carbon 4 oxide. And the last one is odor. So when this is done, then the water is passed on to the next stage, into a large tank. And the next stage we have there is coagulation. flocculation. In this stage is the addition of chemicals. There are two chemicals that are added. The first chemical we have that is added to it is lime. And this lime in chemistry is our calcium oxide. And that is the CaO. Right? Now, when this lime is added to water, what happens? It forms a slick lime. That is, it forms an hydroxide. Now, at this point, I will need to caution that when this is added in the correct proportion. Now, the essence is that if you add more of this to it, it's going to transform the temporary hardness of that water to permanent hardness, which will make it difficult for the treatment. And so, in that case, when you add a proportionate amount in the calculated form to it, of course, it will just do the function for which it is added. Now, the reason for this is for two reasons. One of the reasons is that it is used to reduce the acidity. Then the second reason is to remove hardness. Now, in this case, the hardness that we are looking at is a temporal hardness. Now, if you recall, under removal of temporal hardness of water, this was one of our methods of removing the temporal hardness of water. Okay, so that is one of the chemicals that is added. Then the second chemical that is added is potash alum. Now, potash alum in its chemical form is written as KAL, is a complex compound, SO4-2. Now, that is potash alum. If we don't use the potash alum, what we do is that we make use of the sodium aluminate 3. And this is written as AnLO2. So either of these can be applied. Now, when you add either the potash alum or the sodium aluminate 3, what this does is that it helps to take care of those large particles of dirt you have in that water. Now, remember that as the water comes from a natural source, it is not clean. It contains particles of dirt. And so these impurities in the water is being clumped by this chemical, which is the potash alum. So the clumping of that chemical will result into a large particle of dirt. That large particle of dirt is known as flux. A large particle of dirt clumped by the addition of potash alum is known as flux. And that name comes from flocculation, hence the flocculation method. Now, this flux that we have will move alongside with the treated water into the next stage. And the next stage is sedimentation. In this stage, there is no addition of chemicals. What you do in this stage is to allow this flux to settle down. And when the flux they settle down to the base of that tank, you have a large deposit of that flux. The large deposits of that flux that is formed is known as sludge. So sludge is a large deposit. A large deposit of flux formed. Now, this large deposit settles down at the base of the tank. Now, after this phase, the water is passed on to the next stage. And the next stage is filtration. Now, why the filtration? Of course, in that water, it is not all the particles that can be taken care of by the sedimentation stage. And so at that point, when it goes into the next stage, which is filtration, any little or any fine particles you still have left will be taken care of by the filtration stage. So the water is passed through a filter bed. Now the filter bed we are talking about is a mixture of sand and gravel. So what happens is the sand and the gravel takes care of the other fine particles of the dirt that you have in that water. And so the water passes. Here, take note, there is no addition. All you are just doing is just filtration. So when it passes to the next stage is disinfection. Now, if you look at it from stages 1 to 4, you discover that what we are being taken care of here is particles. Now, in that same water, of course, it's a common knowledge that since it's a natural water, it will contain bacteria and it will contain some pathogens in it. And so at that point, the water needs to be treated with a chemical. And so at this disinfection stage, what happens is that we add chlorine to it. And so the process here is what we call the chlorination of water. Now, it's not only chlorine we use. We can use compounds that contains chlorine as well. But the commonest is that we use chlorine in the treatment of that water. So what the chlorine does is to kill your bacteria and other pathogens that can be found in that water. Now, in addition to chlorine at this disinfection stage, what happens? There are 2 other important substances that are added, which is healthy to man. Now, one of it is iodine. Now, iodine is added to prevent goiter in a proportionate amount. Then the next one is fluorine. Fluorine is added to prevent tooth decay. So when all of this is done, the water is treated, and rather the water is also purified, which is ready for use. So for me to wrap up this class, I'll just take a brief summary of all that I have just explained. Now, in the treatment of water, we have basically 5 stages. The first stage is the aeration. The second stage is the coagulation / flocculation, where coagulants or flocks are formed. And the third stage is the sedimentation, where there is a separation of the water molecules from the particles, the large particles that are formed to settle at the base of the tank. Then the next one is the filtration. The filtration stage takes care of any finer particles that are still left in your water, just to make it clean. And the 5th stage is your disinfection stage, which of course is the addition of chlorine to kill bacteria and other pathogens. Now, in addition to that 5th stage, we have iodine, which of course prevents goiter, and we have fluorine, which prevents tooth decay. Now, this is where I am going to wrap up this class for today. If you have any questions, you can send them to my private chat, and of course I will do justice to them. Thank you.